Hey, I just passed you the co-host choose. There you go. What's up, Nick? If you give us a couple minutes, we'll get everything set up in the Jumbotron, a PDF of the book. We'll get everything set up in a Jumbotron, a PDF of the book. And, oh, cool. The thread and, oh, I'll put the library since you got the others. Okay. I gotta pull up the PDF on my side. 1 second.
Happy Sunday, everybody.
All right, I got it pulled up. So the PDF, choose, she got the PDF in the Jumbotron for us, along with the other thread or the threads of the other spaces of the previous chapters and readings. So I'm starting from page 204, and it's like the very first paragraph, and I'm gonna just jump into it. J. Edgar Hoover and the Federal Bureau of Investigation have primary responsibility for determining who would be placed in detention camps. Since Hoover considers most rebellions to be quote unquote communist inspired, i.e., in the language of the McCarran Act, inspired by foreign enemies, it requires no great stretch of the imagination to see how the law could be applied. Allen toured 5 of the 6 McCarran Act camp sites and found them either fallen into disuse, no longer in existence, or put to other use by the U.S. Bureau of Prisons. Look, senior editor William Hedgepeth visited the camps more recently and found the following. The Allenwood, Pennsylvania camp, covering 4,200 acres, is operated by the Bureau of Prisons as a minimum security prison, mostly for draft resistors. Camp Administrator P.A. Schrewer claimed he had heard nothing about plans to shift the camp to McCarran Act uses. The next concentration camp they have here, the Avon Park, Florida camp, was leased in the late 50s from the Air Force by the state of Florida for use as a facility in its own prison system. Another one, the Florence, Arizona camp, used for prisoners of war in the 1940s, now serves as a minimum security federal jail for about 80 persons awaiting trial. Another one is the Wickenburg, Arizona camps. Building still stands unused, but the property itself supposedly has been returned to the private leaser. The next one is the El Reno, Oklahoma camp detention barracks have been dismantled by the Bureau of Prisons, which now maintains the property for beef herd pastures. Another one is the Tool Lake, Newell, California camp has the most disturbing past because it held 22,500 Japanese Americans during World War II. It has been divided up among numerous new owners, including the township of Newell. According to Allen, the federal government maintains the right of re-entry to the camps at Wickenburg and Tule Lake. Based on buildings in existence in 1966, he estimated the total combined capacity of the 6 camps at 26,500. Hedgepeth viewed Allen's pamphlet with a slightly jaundiced eye. He quoted officials as saying there was no need for the camps and that Congress hadn't appropriated any money for detention camp purposes in many years. Hedgepeth took his inquiry as far as the then Attorney General Ramsey Clark, who declared that there have been and will be no concentration camps in the United States. Yet, Hedgepeth could not himself categorically deny that concentration camps would ever be used in this country. In fact, he admitted that military planners in Washington do acknowledge that detention of dissenters on at least a limited basis could conceivably take place should prolonged, simultaneous, and seemingly coordinated urban riots reach such grand scale. Nationally, disruptive proportions as to require the declaration of martial law. A couple of weeks before Hedgepeth's article was published, or probably after it was written, the House Un-American Activities Committee released a 65-page report which suggested that, quote-unquote, guerrilla warfare in the cities could be countered by widespread use of detention centers. Since urban guerrillas would be declaring a state of war, the report contended, they could expect to forfeit their rights as in wartime. And continued ominously, the McCarran Act provides for various detention centers to be operated throughout the country, and these might well be utilized for the temporary imprisonment of warring guerrillas. For ghettos in which guerrilla activity is recurrent, the HUAC report suggested the use of identification cards for the residents, which would be issued by an office for the control and organization of its inhabitants. So, like, what I just read is really important because in the previous reading, when there was a quote from a politician saying, "Oh, now there's no such thing as concentration camps," but then this part of the chapter is breaking down like, actually, yeah, we did have detention camps set up specifically for rioters. Because remember, even though in this reading it's saying guerrilla warfare militants, they had already identified that people who riot are looked at as pawns conducting guerrilla warfare. So then they go on to say that, you know what, it's not such a bad idea if we have detention centers already in place to be able to detain these people when such things break out. Again, they already said like when they know to pull the trigger, which is when they have coordinated simultaneous attacks. So it's like, we do need to learn and read this because again, this is not something that is new. We actually have a past that we can reference and see like what they've done before, how our people responded, where strategies can be better, and how it will look today in its present time. It will look different, but we can draw parallels. So there it was, and all according to the well-tested Nazi formula. Population expert Philip M. Hauser put the matter bluntly when he said that America has two choices. Either the country can make a heavy investment aimed at eliminating ghettos, or it can suppress rebellious blacks. If we are not prepared, he continued, to make the investment in human resource that is required, we will be forced to increase our investment in the police, the National Guard, and the Army. So another parallel we can draw is that oftentimes what they'll do, it's pissing me off because I'm getting mad. So what they'll do is they'll sit there and they'll have these conditions like I described in the previous reading, how they do gentrification in certain parts of Houston. And then so you'll have right across the street, literally 2 walks across the street, an apartment complex where people make maybe 10 to 15,000 a year, if that. And then you have right across the street a bunch of nurses, doctors, engineers, all with homes that cost, almost $500,000. And then what ends up happening is, of course, naturally, I'm going to take, if I am shut out of the workforce in order to be able to access resources, I'm going to go where the resources are. So then when quote unquote crime happens, right, or people reacting to their conditions of being deprived and placed in poverty due to racism, white supremacy, and capitalism, right, what ends up happening is that those people who then live in that neighborhood in those $500,000 homes support politicians and people who will inflate police budgets. But then again, we have to draw the parallels that that's not the sole reason why, the state inflates police budgets. They're not responding to the people. They could care less about the people. It's basically, it's like, it's a facade. It's like, oh, you asked for this when I was going to do it anyway, because I already saw where this is going. I know the system of capitalism as an elite and why it stands because it benefits me. And I know what I have to do to maintain it. And that's through violent repression. So whenever we see violent repression is basically what I'm trying to get at is we have to make sure we don't fall into that trap of buying the narrative that they put in front of us. Oh, we asked for this or certain people asked for this. Although that could be the case, we have to always understand the state was going to operate on that anyway, regardless. So basically, it keeps our strategy the same. The system must fall. The system must be dismantled. And can nobody be free unless we're all free? And I'm going to go ahead and keep reading. My bad for the tangent.
No,
Let me
of your
see, where did I leave off?
tangents. Cut it out.
Population expert. Oh, I'm sorry, I already read that. Either country can make and possibly happen here. Okay, here we go. We will be forced to increase our investment in the police, the National Guard, the Army, and possibly it can happen here. We may be forced to resort to concentration camps and even genocide. Y'all, this is Philip M. Hauser saying this in 1967. Hauser favored the first alternative, but there are probably many white Americans who would just as soon see the latter implemented. There was a third alternative, however, which Hauser did not consider, namely the corporatist program, which would be examined shortly. The question was, is it likely that repression approaching genocidal proportions will be employed against insurgent Black communities in the near future? To begin to answer this question, it must first be recalled that hardcore advocates of massive repression tend to be either local officials, mayors, police chiefs, etc., or representatives of the right wing, such as HUAC. With the growing tendency towards centralization of effective power at the national level, there is a corresponding diminution in the ability of local officials to take independent action in implementing what they feel should be done in any given situation. Moreover, local police forces are being brought under pressure to professionalize themselves, that is, to bring their operations in line with national standards and practices. In August 1968, for example, the Justice Department offered the states $4.35 million under the 1968 Crime Control Law. This was the first federal money ever designated to prepare for and help avert riots in the cities. The funds were to be used by local law enforcement agencies for a variety of purposes, including extra training, planning and cooperative arrangements with law enforcement agencies, special units, preparation of guidelines for personnel, acquisition of equipment, and public education aimed at reducing community tensions and grievances. So propaganda.
Child. Um,
Uh, Choose
yeah,
the
I was
amount.
gonna say, do you need a break? But my food delivery is about to get here, so I might have to pop off for a second. But yeah, I can take over
Okay.
though. The net
Okay.
effects of such programs is to transform police departments from purely local institutions into agencies charged with implementing national policy. I find that so interesting because remember Joy James pointed out that after Freddie Gray was killed, Obama eventually said his hands were tied. He can't do anything. He can't federalize the police. So
Mm-hmm.
the police can implement federal policy, but no one can hold them accountable. I'm so sorry. Give me one
Right.
second. I'll pick up after
No
this
problem. I'll go
paragraph.
ahead. Okay. I got you. This is deemed necessary in order to streamline local operations and to allow maximum planning and coordination in dealing with those areas of crime which the national government chooses to combat. As for the right wing, groups such as HUAC are useful to the national power structure because they can harass and intimidate dissident elements of the population. However, these groups do not set national policy. HUAC, for instance, has not produced a single piece of new legislation in many years, yet HUAC exists and probably will continue to exist because of the services it renders in making trouble for the vocarious dissenters. What then is national policy as it applies to
I got
urban
it.
revolts? Since the revolt,
Sorry.
okay,
Now my Indian food is
you're good. Thank you.
here. We eating some garlic naan
Mhm.
today. Happy Sunday to everybody. Also retweet the space, share the space. Um, yeah, UHC exists and probably will continue to exist because of the services it renders in making trouble for vociferous dissenters. What then is national policy as it applies to urban revolts? Since the revolts are themselves recent phenomenon, it should first be observed that before 1967, there was apparently no unified policy for dealing with them. After 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 the massive rebellions of that year, however, a policy was formulated and experimented with during the riots which broke out following the murder of Dr. King. This is a policy of containment. Nearly 70,000 National Guard and federal troops were called to duty to deal with riots, which hit some 125 cities at that time. The troops did their job with minimal use of violent force. They were instructed to tolerate a certain level of arson and looting, to use their weapons only when absolutely necessary. The watchword was to exercise restraint and hold down fire. This policy evolved out of a series of studies and meetings held in 1967 at top governmental levels. Participants in meetings included Ramsey Clark, Cyrus Vance, government lawyers, police chiefs, military personnel, and some civil rights people. Let's wake it up. Some civil rights people, they was in that meeting. It's niggas in
Mhm.
those meetings, child. After the broad outlines of the policy were worked out, a broad range of government, police, and military personnel were invited to meetings in early 1968 designed to convince them out of the efficacy of proposed policy. The essential ingredients of this policy can be summarized as follows. One, have available large numbers of troops, especially trained in riot control techniques and stationed at points around the country from which they can easily motor or be airlifted to trouble areas. Two, instruct the troops to hold their fire, but give them substantial leeway in the use of tear gas in making arrests. Three, have local authorities impose curfews and then arrest anyone who violates the curfew. The basic idea is to make a massive show of force while minimizing the actual use of force. Detailed plans for implementing this policy on a nationwide basis were drawn up at the beginning of March 1968 under the code name Garden Plot. And as noted previously, it was given a relatively successful trial run during the April riots. I think it's so interesting that they named it Garden Plot because, like, that's intentional. We got to have that discussion. That's
Mhm.
crazy because they really planted the seeds. Anyway, although the new riot policy calls for restraint in the uses of violent force, this is not done for humanitarian reasons. Some officials have tried to argue that it was the government's desire to minimize deaths that led to the adoption of the new policy. But this was hardly a plausible account of the motives of a government which had wreaked so much havoc and destruction in Vietnam. Ramsey Clark probably spoke part of the truth when he said that shooting rioters would alienate the minorities and introduce those who were not disposed to violence now to adopt terrorist and guerrilla tactics. In this, he was eminently right, since history shows that in many instances, revolutions are as much organized by the overly repressive measures taken by panicky governments as they are by the agitation of conscious revolutionaries. There is a considerable disagreement over just how much actual sniping there has been in recent riots, but indiscriminate retaliatory gunfire by policemen and troops is probably the best way to guarantee that in the future that there will be more snipers on those rooftops. A second and closely related reason for the policy of restraint was the belief of the policymakers that alienated blacks could be won back to the American system, and that this course would be less disruptive to society at large than a policy of severe repression. Hence, it was necessary to contain the riots, but not bear down with an iron fist, because this would further alienate an already dissatisfied and volatile group. Furthermore, containment of the riots will buy time for the second prong of the new policy to take effect, an intensive program to convince Black people that they as a group have a stake in the American system.
Mhm.
Child!
Exactly.
Ooh, ooh, ooh. They just tell on
Yeah,
themselves, and niggas don't want to hear them though. They say vote blue no
okay,
matter who, but they
really.
literally telling you, we gonna trick y'all to think y'all have a stake in this. Psych.
For real though. Yo, so do you wanna eat and I can read a little
I'm a
longer?
snack on my garlic on, and
Okay,
then in 2 pages we'll do our regular thing.
got you. I'm gonna read the footnote too, because I just
Okay.
thought it was interesting. So this is the footnote on page 209. This should not be interpreted to mean that repression will diminish. On the contrary, as American society is further polarized by domestic dislocations and the repercussions of foreign military adventures, it can be anticipated that there will be a steady, although gradual, increase in the level of repression. What is being argued against here is the notion that genocidal repression is likely in the immediate future. In terms of the national power structure, there seems to be no real ground for this belief. However, as the general level of repression gradually escalates, it can be expected that one of the favorite tactics of police forces will be more frequently employed, namely decapitation of militant groups and movements. This is especially so since the U.S. Supreme Court has upheld the constitutionality of state conspiracy laws. More and more militant leaders, white as well as black, are likely to be arrested on charges of conspiracy to bomb, assassinate, otherwise engage in illegal activity, even where there is very little evidence to substantiate these charges. As a consequence, there is an urgent need for a national organization devoted to mass political defense. The program will be examined in the following pages, but it is now necessary to consider another point. One of the prime objections raised by conservatives to the new riot policy is that it tolerates property destruction. This is true, and the small ghetto businessmen and landlord are heavily hit by riots. This loss is acceptable, however, because the American economy is increasingly organized around large-scale economic units. These units may be located in cities, but they are not usually found in the slum areas that they are likely to spawn rebellions. It is only if the rebellions spread outside the slums that the nation's industrial facilities, for example, are seriously jeopardized. Hence, another argument for the containment policy. The only major industry that is threatened by the riots is the insurance industry. Insured losses in the Watts Rebellion alone totaled an estimated $40 million. While this does not begin to compare with the insured losses which may result from natural disasters such as hurricanes, Hurricane Betsy in 1965 racked up insured losses several times as great as the insured loss. Sorry, I needed water. Insured loss in all the racial riots in recent history. Still, since riots have become recurrent, the figures do begin to add up, and the insurance industry feels the pinch. But a remedy is in sight. Legislation proposed by an advisory panel on insurance in riot-affected areas headed by New Jersey Governor Richard Hughes calls for the federal government to establish a National Insurance Development Corporation, to which insurance companies would contribute a portion of their premiums in order to pool the risk. NIDC would provide reinsurance to these companies for riot and civil commotion perils in all lines of property coverage. Federal funds would back up large losses. In short, under this plan, insurance companies could continue to operate at a profit even in riot-torn areas, since the federal government would underwrite any large losses they might incur. However, according to Chicago Daily News, April 8, 1968, the Hughes panel also recommended voluntary plans to assure all property owners fair access to insurance and federal tax deferral to increase the capacity of the insurance industry to absorb costs. Thus, any small ghetto businessman who can afford the premiums, naturally there would have to be increases in riot-prone areas because of the increased risk, would be assured of coverage against losses. And the insurance industry, backed by the federal treasury, would be quite happy to continue with business as usual. So basically what we're reading is how the system adjusts itself according to prevailing norms. So now in this moment of time, right, this is 67, 68, that riots and uprisings are everywhere, all across America. So they're like, okay, we could either violently repress them now and run the risk of creating even more revolutionaries and prolonging this guerrilla warfare, or we could do like, Trojan horse of community programs and all that, but really these community programs still have the same effect that is causing the conditions for riots and dissent and unrest. But at least it'll come in a pretty package where there would be some kind of quasi priest where people would be like, okay, who wants to be against not a literacy program, like what's a black capitalist program? Oh, own your home programs that they sell out here heavy and they charge so crazy. It's such a scam. But anyway, stuff like that they'll implement in these areas that they know riots will happen. So in areas where people are cut out of housing, all of a sudden you'll start seeing flyers and programs aimed at them about financial literacy programs, or just pay $50 a month and Umar Johnson will tell you how, to be financially literate, even though Umar Johnson's broken asking for donations. But somehow he has the answer in which you can excel in black capitalism. And a lot of them do that. Like it's all kind of like different demagogues and shit. But anyways, when you start seeing that, those act as wet blankets. So they chose to go that route. Basically, let's pay some puppets. Let's put in some black mayors. Let's put some more black people in the police force, the illusion of representation, so that they believe they have a stake in that system, or they believe, oh, one of my people is in there, so they won't possibly do what the crackers have been doing. And of course, we're living proof that we thought. Let me keep going. The bulk of the study, the bulk of this study is the point of, okay. The bulk of this study to this point has been devoted to an examination of how some Black militant groups have used the nationalist sentiment of the Black masses to advance the class interest of the Black bourgeois. It is now necessary to look at the other side of the picture and investigate the manner in which the white corporate elite also has used the rhetoric of Black nationalism in helping itself establish neocolonial control of the Black community. The urban uprising of 1967 made it painfully obvious to America's corporate leaders that the race problem, in quotes, was out of control and posed a potential threat to the continued existence of the present society. McGeorge Bundy spoke for a significant section of American business opinion when he insisted time and time again that resolution of the race question is now the most urgent domestic concern of this country. The endemic racism, which has functioned to the advantage of an adolescent capitalism, was, and in this view, in dire need of serious alteration as it spawned disruption in the mature capitalist society. Blacks must be brought into the mainstream of the economy if they no longer would remain docile while confined outside of it. This did not mean that every Black person would be transformed into a capitalist. Rather, it implied the creation of a class of capitalists and corporate managers within the Black community. The theory was that such a class would ease ghetto tensions by providing living proof to Black dissidents that they can assimilate into the system if only they discipline themselves and work at it tirelessly. A Black capitalist class would serve thereby as a means of social control by disseminating the ideology and values of the dominant white society throughout the alienated ghetto masses.
You want a
They
break?
literally tell on them. Oh, my bad.
Oh, go ahead. They tell on themselves.
They tell on themselves
Make
like,
it up.
yo. And so when we be talking about these things, people are like, oh, so this is, it just so happened to get like this. No, it takes strategy and planning and a lot of effort and understanding of how we respond to certain things in order to create, to keep the capitalist system going. And it constantly changes according to prevailing norms. And this is them at the table, literally planning it out. Okay, how are we going to be able to stay on top? Convince these people they belong at the bottom without them coming to kill us in our sleep. That's literally what they do. That's their meetings. And so that's why I don't understand when someone says, oh, well, then what's the solution? Killing them in their sleep. Like, that's what they're trying to prevent you from doing. They're trying to prevent uprisings. They're trying to prevent revolution. They're trying to prevent loss of their power. Well, then what is the solution? Take their power. Revolution in our lifetime. Like, that's the answer. There's no other way around this. And they know that. And so what will happen too, and we should watch out for too, especially where we find ourselves in the present moment, is that when we understand that that's revolution is the answer. That's how we get to liberation. And if when you start seeing global, especially in the global South, uprisings like we seeing in Haiti and Western Africa, where they're kicking out the French, in Palestine, where they're beating back, white settler colonialists, all that shit happening simultaneously. West Papua were fighting for their independence while they're being genocided and shit. All of that shit happening, right? You're going to start seeing a narrative being put out there, like peace is the way, or there has to be another solution besides armed resistance. Or, why don't we just sit at the table and talk to our enemy that wants to kill us? And like, let's see if we can, somehow appeal to a moral sense that they don't have, and maybe they'll give a concession. When that shit starts coming out, recognize it as a concession and what it's for. It's not for our liberation, it doesn't get us any step closer. It only helps the machine to be able to adjust to prevailing norms, create new facades, hire new puppets, and find different ways to keep going as business as usual, which is world domination and our continued suffering and oppression. My bad, baby. You ready?
Yeah, no, it's real. And I think that it's important just to like highlight it's talking about easing ghetto tensions, right? The goal is to never liberate people from the ghetto. There's always going to be somebody in the ghetto under the system, but it's about taking some people out so they could, like you said, be a wet blanket. And it's just like, who is speaking for those people, right? Who actually are living the violent life of being impoverished. If anyone has the time or the capacity to act as an intermediary, that means that they're not facing the brunt of that institution, which means they can't be trusted. Because whose interests are you really, you know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Ooh, baby. Speaking of the related phenomenon of tokenism, Barron and Sweezy, oh yeah, nice name. Barron and Sweezy pointedly observed the theory behind tokenism, not often expressed but easily deductible from the practice, is that the Black bourgeoisie is a decisive element in the Negro community. It contains the intellectual and political elite, the people with education and leadership ability and experience. It already has a material stake in the existing social order, but its loyalty is doubtful because of the special disabilities imposed upon it solely because of its color. If this loyalty can be made secure, the potential revolutionizing of the Negro protest movement can be forestalled and the world can be given palatable evidence through the placing of loyal Negroes in prominent positions. That the United States does not pursue a South African type policy of apartheid, but on the contrary, fights against it and strives for equal opportunity for its Negro citizens. The problem is thus how to secure the loyalty of the Black bourgeoisie. Mind you, he's not talking about actually changing the conditions of the apartheid. He's saying he needs a veneer that looks like it's not apartheid. And that's what this class is going to do for the Black community. That's sick. Also, don't like how he said it was a special disability. Um, that's ableist as fuck. Like, racism is racism. Like, we don't have to call it a disability because that's not real.
That's absolutely.
Coupled with the thrust towards Black capitalism and Black management is a much touted effort to integrate Black workers into the economy, particularly those who industry designates as the hardcore unemployed. There are persons who, when measured against normal hiring standards, simply are unemployable. They have no marketable skills, and the young among them swell to the ranks of rioters. Reclamation of this group, which in 1967 numbered in the hundreds of thousands, would have further the advantage of putting about $1 billion annually to national output, while at the same time subtracting millions from welfare costs. But, as remarked before, most of the training and retraining programs tried to date have had at best only limited success, due in part to their limited scope. Beyond opening jobs in industry and training potential workers, some provision also must be made for those who are too old to be retrained or tied down by child raising or suffer from physical or psychosocial impairments would make it impossible for them to work. In the past, this tax was assigned to the welfare system, but the welfare system itself is in crisis, and as the Riot Commission's report said, quote, our present system of public assistance contributes materially to the tensions and social disorganization that have led to civil disorders. Because the welfare system is built upon a labyrinth of federal, state, and local legislation, which sometimes conflicts with itself, and which requires a cumbersome, inefficient bureaucracy to administer it. The Commission recommended the establishment of a quote unquote simplified national system of income supplementation, which would not only make payments to traditional welfare recipients, such as elderly people and women with children, but also would encompass employed persons working at substandard hours or wages, and those among the unemployed for whom there are no jobs. So the government should pay people whose jobs won't pay them enough. Backing growing and such a program quite backing for some type of guaranteed income scheme has been growing, and such a program quite possibly will be implemented in the foreseeable future. The emergence of corporations and corporate liberals as leaders in the effort to resolve urban crises have become apparent in August 1967 with the formation of the National Urban Coalition. Organized in Washington, the coalition was an alliance of 1,200 business, labor, religious, civil rights, and government leaders. In its ranks were such corporate leaders such as Roy Ash, president of Linton Industries, but fuck that nigga, he's a capitalist.
Mhm,
Major aerospace company Henry Ford II. Ooh, not Hitler's bestie.
mhm,
The descendant of Hitler's bestie.
mhm,
Um, David Rockefeller, president of Chase Manhattan Bank. Frederick L. J. Close, chairman of Aluminum Company of America. Andrew Heekskill, chairman of Time. Heekskill, North and New York's Mayor John Lindsay acted as co-chairman of the group steering committee. John Gardner, former Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare, became chairman, announcing that it had committed itself to programs instead of promises. The coalition proceeded to set up subsidiary groups in cities around the country. Gardner
Oh,
called for
I'll start right there.
period.
Thank you. Gardner called for greater Black involvement in meeting the urban crisis, arguing that stability in the cities could not be achieved until we bring into the same conversation all significant leadership elements that hold power or veto power in the life of the community. He also announced that it would take 25 years and perhaps $200 billion to finally solve the urban crisis. The fact that they got it mapped out onto the day, I'm trying to tell you, we need to start planning on some shit like that. Another major organization in the government business partnership was the National Alliance of Businessmen. The Johnson administration set up NAB early in 1968, and Henry Ford II was appointed chairman. But of its function was to act as a one-step service for businessmen in dealing with the federal government. Many businessmen had complained bitterly about the frustrations involved in dealing with several government agencies at once. We had to get approval from one state and three Washington agencies for money, and this was time consuming, said one executive. In my opinion, no businessman has that kind of time. NAB set high goals for itself. 500,000 jobs for hardcore unemployed by 1971, 100,000 of them by June 1969, and some 200,000 jobs in the summer of 1968 for youth out of school. With much fanfare, Ford began visiting other businessmen, urging them to sign pledges that they would hold a certain number of jobs opening for hardcore cases. The hardcore cases were to be drawn from 50 key cities, which NAB listed as most in need. But despite a well-publicized beginning, NAB had to concede that its campaign to find temporary jobs for the summer of 1968 was a good bit less than successful. Real quick, so they had that. I was actually a part of a program that stemmed from this. So the Urban League does it. And at the time I was in Arizona. And when we were kids, and you can be as young as 13 and work for McDonald's. And how they would do it is you wouldn't get paid by McDonald's. You would get paid by Urban League. And you would work at McDonald's. And I mean, they would work you in anything. Now they had already established rules and labor laws, but didn't nobody enforce that shit? Because the point was to keep all the black kids working. You can exploit them for their labor, but also too they don't have a chance to sit down, read, and organize and be or rebel against the system. So yeah, I was a part of one of those programs, but they thought I still did both. In return for the businessman efforts, Johnson promised that $350 million would be made available to cover extraordinary costs involved in training and supportive services. He also sent to Congress a housing bill designed to subsidize the construction industry by enabling the federal government to charter construction consortiums and grant them tax concessions to bring their returns up to the level of other forms of investment. So basically, what I wanted to highlight is that when we see certain things like, oh, we're going to institute a summer program for kids to be working, or better yet, like we can use the current charter school, right? So in some charter schools, not all, but some, they have this program where part of the kids' credit hours is to go work. I know in New Orleans, one of the places I saw kids working was at the casino, which was wild. But their job was it was mostly cleaning and like checking badges and shit. But still, and so I'm talking to the kids, and these are kids just young, already have so if y'all don't know how school systems are set up, so a lot of the kids get transported out to schools. They don't go to schools in their area. So you're talking about a kid who probably has to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning to get ready, go to school all day. And that's work in itself, dealing with the racist fucking teachers there and all the abuses they impose upon kids. And then them kids have to go to work like an adult at night and don't get home till like 11 o'clock at most times. And I'm just like, what the fuck? And the thing is, the reason why I was accepted is because of the campaign around it. You know, the kids were wild. They're out here out of control. They have no structure. They just want all they want is handouts. So it was easy to put that marketing campaign out, form the manufacturer consent, and then next thing you know, they had their people were sending their kids on buses to send their kids to the factory, basically. Like literally, that's how they got around child labor laws. It's wild. The shit goes on still to this day, and we just accept it because we call it giving kids responsibility and structure, when we should be looking at it as literally enslaving kids to corporations. Let's see. Design to subsidize construction by enabling the federal government. I already read that. Writing in a special issue of Fortune magazine devoted to business and the urban crisis, January 1968, Max Ways discussed business' newfound interest in the racial crisis, first noting the sluggishness and ineptitude which the government and most social institutes had responded to the crisis. His name is Ways. Ways went on to write, since mid-year of 1967, and largely as a response to the race crisis, the business attitude toward the problems of the city is shifting. The ardent efforts of the nation's business institutions will be especially needed because they have qualities demanded by the double crisis of the Negro in the city. Modern corporations are flexible and innovative. They are accustomed to sensing and meeting and invoking the changing desires of the public. Above all, they practice the difficult art of mobilizing specialized knowledge for action, i.e., the art of managing change. So basically, what it's just saying is that corporations have a new and innovative modern way of being a slave owner and running plantations that can reduce the losses from riots, can reduce the time in which people rebel, and we can maximize profits because they'll be more docile and complacent and well managed. That's basically all he said. And then I want to also say too is that, like, when we look, you know what? Now we keep reading. Moreover, Ways wrote, business can hope to succeed where the government have failed because business is the one important segment of society Negroes today do not regard with bitter suspicion, which we need to change that. But also too, it's one of the reasons why, for those of y'all who might work in like industries like the oil industry, they sent emails across like different corporations, like Dow, for example, Exxon. Their CEO put out news emails of Black Lives Matter, and as a white person, I just have to say those type of letters and shit, and they put that out. And what ended up happening is people on the job was confused. They was like, "What? Oh, see, this has never happened. They support us." I was like, "No, the business are using this opportunity to use our slogans and our rhetoric and our work, our liberation framework, they're going to co-opt it and use it as a Trojan horse in order to get you further invested into Black capitalism." And that's literally what they did. It's some sick shit. And I have to make a thread of books where there's actually a good 3 books that go into detail of how this happened during the Black Lives Matter movement. Let's see. To still any remaining doubts in the minds of his business readers, Way said rehabilitation of the cities promises to open up the era of the public market, when whole communities will need to buy for their residents. Cleaner air and rivers, better scientific research, better techniques of learning, better traffic control. If these demands are to be met, Ways asserts. Clearly, the great corporations will play a large part in supplying them. One can imagine, say, a private contractor selling an anti-pollution service to 50 neighboring towns and services. They're gonna sell us air, y'all.
The
They
air
already
that they
do.
took away, the shit
That
that they took away. So
exactly. Exactly. Go ahead, baby. Cook.
no, I'm good. I'm just like, damn, they rude.
Oh, as fuck. Literally, will punch you in the eye and then sell you the ice to put it on and be like, I helped you. Like, you the one who blackened my eye. What are you talking about? But yeah, literally. Because I mean, shit, if we just look at the oil and gas, the amount of water it poisons in usually Black communities is crazy. And then again, they'll say, oh, so you need clean water? Here's this water filtration device that we own and patent and that no one else can do any kind of modifications on. So you can only get clean water our way. And yeah, you probably have to pay like as much as like a mortgage payment or your whole month's rent and shit like that, but at least you'll have clean water. And now we got these fucking things screwed in our fucking sinks and shit. It's just sick. It is so sick. It's like they see like an opportunity to again capitalize off the conditions that they create. So they make horrible, unbearable, inhumane conditions and then sell you trademark humanity or trademark revolution. It's so sick. I hate capitalism. I can't wait till it burns to the fucking ground. Um, so yeah. Let's see, ways and affiliations. If these demands are to be met, ways asserts clearly the great corporations. Oh, there is a great opportunity for business here, and it appears that ghetto reorganization will be the pilot project. And this is 1967, y'all. So it's not. I'm not saying that to be like, oh, it happened then, it's not happening now. No, I'm saying the way we got here is is through this. Like because they mapped out all this happening and saying, hey, this will take 25 years. Also, within that 25 years, they still had more meetings and restructured so they can go another 25, another 50, another 100. So the reason why things are so fucked up is because they deliberately made it so and continue to pull the strings to keep it this way. How does that make you feel? Like that makes me mad. Like I don't, they are so lucky we're not fucking going with guillotines to their front porches. I'm just
Not
trying to
yet.
say,
No,
mm,
but
shit, I'm not. I talk
absolutely.
about it all the time. What's
Let's
up, babe?
wake that up. I said, let's wake that up.
Mhm.
I just want to say, I'm gonna take over for you here,
Okay.
baby, so you can take a break. If you are requesting in 15 minutes, we're gonna stop reading, and so that's when we are gonna like open up to discussion. We have time for discussion today.
Let me see. Yeah, I do.
Okay. So we'll accept requests in 15 minutes. And thanks to everyone who shared out the space. Appreciate y'all. Um, One of the more vigorous units set up by the National Urban Coalition was its New York City branch. The New York Coalition was headed by Christian H. Herter Jr., a Mobil Oil Corporation vice president. Roy Innes of CORE sat on the coalition's board of directors. In May 1968, the organization announced plans to raise some $4 million from private sources. Within a month, the group had accumulated more than half of the amount it sought. A third of the money was to be turned over to Mayor Lindsay's summer program to keep the peace in New York, in the city streets. I also was part of that summer program, summer youth employment program. $7 an hour, y'all.
Mhm.
Rough. Um, part,
Mhm.
part of the money was also to go to two new corporations created by the New York Urban Coalition. The corporations were to begin operations in July. One of the Coalition Development Corporation, one was the Coalition Development Corporation, the purpose of which was to provide managerial and technical advice to businessmen. Ghetto businessman is crazy. The second was the Coalition Venture Corporation, and its purpose was to make available risk capital to ghetto businessmen. The idea for the corporation stemmed from an 18-page report drafted in March by the Coalition's Economic Development Task Force. Quote, one major goal of the New York Coalition, the report began, is to foster self sustaining social and economic growth in the ghettos. The task force was assigned the job of determining how best to achieve this goal. Historically, the report continued, minority groups have been chafed and constricted in their economic and social growth by having to live in a society where the means of generating capital frequently have been held by individuals who lived outside the minority community. The task force concluded that ghetto businessmen are handicapped by a critical shortage of business know how and a chronic lack of venture operating capital. It recommended one, that a management assistant corporation be set up to provide managerial and other assistance to help entrepreneurs maximize their effective use of current and future resources, and two, that a small business investment corporation be created and licensed by the Small Business Administration to provide equity capital and make long-term loans to ghetto entrepreneurs. And three, the establishment of a venture capital corporation to provide funds for new investments. Within a few months, the first and third proposals were implemented. Oh, so they didn't do the loan one. Interesting. On the surface, these recommendations would appear to be free of any taint of white manipulation and control. The coalition was simply creating a mechanism for providing Black entrepreneurs with the business information they required and the capital that had been denied to them by big white banks downtown. Charges such as those leveled by Innes against Robert Kennedy's corporate endeavors in the Brooklyn ghetto would seem out of place here. Yet, when the coalition's proposal is examined more closely, the thin but tough strings which would tie Black capitalists to the corporate power structure are revealed. In the first place, the board of directors of each of the proposed coalition corporations were to be the same in order to ensure close coordination. This board would set general policy guidelines, and beneath it would be a review committee charged with relating the guidelines to actual practice. Specifically, the review group would be concerned with establishing specific requirements and assistance reviewing and approving or rejecting specific proposals, and suggesting what financial agreements could be made or arrangements could be made. Furthermore, the review committee would have the authority to mandate the involvement of the development corporation in any projects in which it thinks is desirable. Thus, the review group determines which ghetto businesses are funded and has the power to appoint what is in effect a monitor in those enterprises about which it has reservations. The review committee itself was to consist of individuals drawn from the membership of the coalition, representatives of financial institutions, and community representatives. Review of specific proposals will be conducted by proposal teams composed of 5 persons. This makeup of the team is important. 2 members will be drawn from the staff of the coalition corporations, 2 from the financial institutions, and 1 from the community. Hence, the proposal teams will be securely controlled by exactly the same corporate interests which control the urban coalition itself, although there will be some semblance of community participation. So just to know, they tried to make the 2 chairs the same, which obviously we all know that why that would be a problem, and only included 1 community member on these things. So they're like essentially set up to fail. Investment proposals would be judged on the basis of several criteria, including location in the ghetto, providing employment opportunities to ghetto residents, and social utility. This latter phrase is nowhere defined in the report, but some insight into its meaning is shed by the following paragraph. Ghetto residents complain that most of the businesses in their areas are controlled by outsiders, quote unquote. Real and imagined abuses and deception by the outside shop owners are a major cause of discontent. This discontent, implicitly or explicitly, has linked business white abuse in ghetto minds. So that distress is not only of whites in business, but of business itself. Therefore, to the extent possible, the concept of business as a beneficial force must be promoted to gain active support of the community as a whole. Child. Consequent. No, go ahead.
No, I was laughing. My bad.
That isn't it funny? Because niggas will stay screaming black owned business. Like, damn, they were successful as fuck. They did that. People are, the people have been brainwashed. Consequently, those proposals, which among other things promise to help spread in Black communities the corporatist mentality of business as a beneficial force, will likely be judged by the review group as having social utility. Also, criteria for assessing individual applicants were linked in the task force report. In addition to the criteria relating to the soundness of the applicant's business plans, the reviewers must also seek evidence of, quote, a strong desire to succeed as an independent businessman, evidence of sustained effort towards an objective, such as holding a job, accumulating savings, getting an education, or supporting a family, evidence of the applicant's energy and willingness to work more than 40 hours a week, and evidence of his understanding of his need for counseling and advice and a willingness to accept it.
If you
Jesus.
think about it, like that's literally how job interviews are conducted. Questions to answer these.
Yeah.
Like, what is the time you had a difficult situation and you went through it? They're not trying to see if you know how to navigate problems. They're trying to see if you'll take them abusing you on the job and you'll just take it and not raise any stink. There's certain questions they'll ask you that on its face, it'll seem like, oh, they're trying to see if I like have the aptitude, but the aptitude is will you be a compliant, docile slave? And also let me impose my politics on you because at the workforce, there's a book I'm going to post, but in the workforce, the way it's structured, a lot of times they say no religion, no politics, no race, and that's a whole lie. It's no like nothing that challenges the status quo. So you'll go on there and hear all kind of conservative. You'll go in the break room and Fox News is on 24/7. You'll go in there and they can't wait to talk about Trump and all kind of dumb shit and conservative conspiracy theories and all kind of shit. And you can't bring your radical ass communist shit in there, or there will be a problem. You'll get fired. It's shit like that. That they're literally the job is also a place of indoctrination, just like we identify properly that schools indoctrinate people. The adult is further indoctrinated within the workforce. I've seen it all the time. Do you want me to pick up right here?
Yes, it's also been an hour. So maybe find a good place to stop. Also, I saw in the comments that someone said what chapter are we on? I'm not sure what chapter we're on, but we're on page 222, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
220.
220, yeah. And the chapter is called Corporate Imperialism versus Black Liberation. So
Yeah.
I'll go ahead and knock out the 2 pages. Yeah, and then we can do the discussion. While discussion's going on, I'm gonna post the thread of those books on capitalism that one of the listeners had requested. Um, in sum, it must be concluded from the foregoing that far from being a no strings attached, quote unquote, program, the endeavors of the New York Coalition amount to a sophisticated mechanism for selecting and aiding persons in the Black community who are to be programmed into the new class of Black capitalists. See? The review group selects only those applicants who meet predetermined personal, social, ideological, and financial standards. Exactly. Um, these standards would tend to favor those applicants who already exhibit traditional middle class virtues of thriftiness, hard work, and devotion to family. The development corporation that acts as a real quick, because they use certain words, right? So those virtues of thriftiness, hard work, and devotion, right, can be found in any person, right? But that's not what they're looking for. So when they say like hard work, that means can I work you off the clock and you not complain or go to the labor board against me? Or like if I tell you to do a job outside your job scope, will you just do it and be grateful to me for even allowing you to while still paying you the same amount, which is already not a livable wage? And then, so that's what they mean by hard work. How can I exploit you? And then with questions, that's the place where it was saying all this. Oh, there it is. And devotion to family, it means basically like, oh, you have something to lose. So once I've convinced you to be on it, or once you've gotten this job, I'm exploiting you already. I'm making your workplace unbearable. I also just love being toxic as fuck. So I'm just going to manipulate you in any way possible and have you just angry all the fucking time. But you got to pretend to be happy or I'm going to say you're not a team player. And you'll do it because you need to feed your family. Like you have people who financially depend on you. And since there are not that many avenues for Black people to get jobs, especially well paying jobs, well, what we consider well paying, to the alternative of nothing, you'll more likely put up with more abuse on the job. So that's why they that's how they go through and creating their questions. And I'm glad he mentioned that because that shit pisses me off. The development corporation then acts as a subtle means for socializing the selected individuals into the corporate world, i.e., inoculating them in them those values, attitudes, and practices which are deemed desirable by the corporate groups which back the coalition. Thus, in concrete example, can be seen how the New York corporatists plan and would generate a Black capitalist buffer class firmly wedded in both financial and ideological terms to the white corporate structure. One of the first endeavors of the New York Coalition in this direction was the granting in late 1968 of a substantial loan to the new Acme Foundry in Harlem. The foundry was to produce bronze, aluminum, and non-phosphorus metal castings for values and fittings for the petroleum industry, bases and parts for street lamps, elevator gear planks, parts for door locks, and medical instruments, among other products. The foundry was expected eventually to sell shares to the Harlem community, but until that time, the Harlem Commonwealth Council would be the principal shareholder. Rosendo Beasley and Donald Simmons, both HCC officers, were named, respectively, president and chairman of the board of Foundry. The New York Coalition makes a good example because in its activities, are more subtle than many other corporate efforts to penetrate and control the ghettos. The use of semi-autonomous development corporations avoids the stigma of white interference and allows for maximum financial maneuverability. The more distasteful aspects of corporate manipulation and control, the kind of thing Ennis complained about, are removed by one step and further glossed over by the attractive promise of community participation. However, the essential purpose of putting Black power into business, the creation of a stabilizing Black buffer class, which will make possible indirect white control or neo-colonial administration of the ghettos, is still guaranteed by the structure of the program. The concept of community development corporations was given a significant boost in July 1968 with the introduction in Congress of a so-called Community Self-Determination Act. The act enjoyed the bipartisan sponsorship of 35 senators and was endorsed by CORE. It calls for the inclusion of the poor into the economic system as quote unquote earners, producers, owners, and entrepreneurs, and aims at developing quote unquote order or aims at, quote, developing order, stability, and participation, end quote, in the system. The act would set up development of corporations in Black communities. These corporations would sell shares to local residents and in many ways would operate as ordinary stock companies, but they would also exercise broad powers usually reserved to government agencies or indigenous community organizations. They could, for example, plan urban renewal programs and speak for the community in many areas of public policy. And we'll stop there on page 221.
Period. There was a lot there. I feel like I'm processing it. And now is the time if you have something to add, you can raise your hands. I guess what I'm just thinking about too, like so stuck on your last comment, is this idea that it was actually instituted in these policies, written down on pen and paper, that they're looking. Oh, I didn't mean to do that. That was just. um, but written down that you're looking for somebody who's willing to do more than 40 hours of work per week, which is like wild because we know that even from children, people are socialized to do more than what is expected of them or more than what is possible for them. Even if we look at like studies of like homework, we learn that homework doesn't actually help students. It doesn't help them achieve. When we see correlation between homework completion and like student achievement, we see that people who have safe homes to do their homework in and time to do their homework, they do better in school in general. The homework doesn't make them perform any better, but it's a way to socialize and like basically like train the kids to know that once you come home from work, you're still going to be responsible for more work. And it's so sick how, even from young people go through this, but it's literally written on paper that in order to get a life-saving resource like a loan for your business, you need to show that you're willing to be you're right for exploitation. That's wild to me. But
Real quick, sorry. So
mhm.
Chairman requested the mic. I don't know what happened, but I'm throwing you the mic again. So hopefully you still feel comfortable to speak. Please do. I threw you the mic. Or you can request again. It's some kind of glitch. But yeah. Mr. JB, go ahead, bro.
I don't know how it is you guys, you ladies, are always on the subject that is important at the moment to me, but this child labor law. I have something I want to inform you about. My grandparents raised me and put both me and my twin sister through college, and they told me, there's only two ways to be successful: education and by chance or luck. In Iowa, the governor, Kim Reynolds, has put into place signed legislation about child labor laws changes. I'm going to be brief. Under the newly signed law, 14 and 15-year-olds are allowed to work additional hours per day when school is in session, from 4 hours to now 6. They also can work until 9 p.m. most of the year and until 11 p.m. in June. They can work in bars and serve alcohol from 14 years old, as long as an adult is present. They can go into the chicken processing factories, the beef processing factories, where the safety standards are nil, they're non existent. They can be forced by school projects and programs where they're calling labor law programs to supplement their passing grade level by taking up a working position. Now, what this all says to me is we want our children to forget about focusing on education and getting a paying job that is not in a factory, that is not labor. And I don't have a problem with factory or labor jobs, but if we educate our children to want more, to become presidents of a corporation instead of working for a president of a corporation, if we can get out there and show our children, you go to school, you get an education, you can have a better life that is not working your fingers to the bone. We got to start teaching our children that knowledge and education is the way.
And just to back you up, Mr. JB, like even if we apply like a more like a revolutionary lens to this, it's time for us to examine how we deal with work and how it's been imposed upon us and how we look at childhood. Like children are already an oppressed class, and we don't talk about that enough. They are an oppressed class from the home to the school, and now they're in the workforce. Like that should be looked at as something egregious, that we know how we feel, how drained we feel after work, how we don't even have enough emotion and energies to love on our partners or our people at home. That job siphons all of that out of us. And now we're exposing children to that. We're allowing children to be re-exposed to that because there was already time where they were in the labor force from like 5 years old. And then there was people who did movements to combat that. But because we accepted concessions, now our kids are right back on the plantation and it's being sold to us as our education. But then to back up what you said about what they're being used for, like the factory jobs, the chicken shop jobs, the dangerous industrial jobs, not jobs teaching them about medicine, not jobs in which they could be like a help to their community and help heal their community or help in cleaning the water, or how can we address this, architects, so we can build infrastructure, none of that. So the only jobs and trainings that we're getting is to be, factory workers and laborers for these corporations to keep exploiting us, but also to keep us dependent upon the system. Because if none of us know how to be doctors, if none of us know botany to grow plants, if none of us know, farming irrigation techniques and how they're modernized, if none of us have these, more broad and expansive trades and understanding what's going on around us, we are going to be stuck on the tip of the system, the very system that wants to kill us anyways. So yeah, we definitely have to, when we talk about revolution, understand that also means the way in which we do labor, because again, the whole point is to not be exploited. Go ahead, Beck. Or I'm sorry, before Beck, it was Chairman and then yours truly. My bad, Beck.
No, thanks very much. Can you confirm that you hear me, perhaps?
Yes, clear. Thank you.
Okay, no, thanks very much. I would love to first acknowledge everyone who's here, and I'm Chairman Khankim Pasela from South Africa, by the way. So I wanted to go more into the topic, which is Black Awakening in the Capitalistic America, Part 10. I just joined the space today, so I don't know if this is a book or this is just the topic that we're talking about, but I wanted to ask a question to say, even in South Africa, where you find that over 90% of the economy belongs to the 10% minority that are in South Africa, how are we saying we want Black awakening in the capitalistic world like this? We can even date back to what? To see how multiple economies are run. They are run through neoliberal economics, which whereby you have the invisible hand driving the economy of the country and everything else. How are you going to awaken people poor people, especially people who are landless, who are without the means of production and everything else in a capitalistic world? Because whatever that is oppressing them is the capitalism. Uh, I saw the host, the pen and what paper, whose bio, which talks about Kwame Nkrumah. Kwame Nkrumah wrote a book, I think, in the 60s, which was Neocolonialism, the last stage of imperialism. How do you awaken people when people are imperially oppressed by neocolonialism, which is a remote, which is more like an invisible hand that also derives the socio-economic economics of a republic, by the way. So those are some of the questions that I want to ask.
Oh, okay. So yeah, we'll definitely pose that to the space. So to answer your first question about the title, so the title is a book, and the PDF is in the Jumbotron, and it's by Robert Allen. And basically, he addresses the questions that you asked, like what does a Black awakening look like? I would answer, and then I'll pass it on, is that to me, it's not going to look the same everywhere, of course, because even though we can draw parallels to our conditions are different. And so therefore the strategy is going to be different and the awakening is going to look different. So that's why it's so important that the people in that area speak to their experience, and those of us who are, comrades, we listen to them and trust their analysis of their experience, just as we expect the same over here. I would say in America, what a Black awakening would look like. Oh man, this is going to sound so bad. I say I'm not too sure about a Black awakening in America, and that it's going to look like the fairy tale that we paint from watching like Black Panther movies and all that, because we're not there. And the reason why I say we're not there is you can't. I had a prison call last night, right, from an inmate, and we were talking about just different current events in politics and revolution. And actually, funny enough, we talked about this. What does Black awakening look like in America in terms of revolution? And I told him that you can have people ready to pick up a gun and go shoot and engage in warfare, okay, but the revolution doesn't just consist of that. Because if I have a bunch of misogynists and transphobes with guns and shit, and they only fight because they're uncomfortable now, what does that mean and what does that look like? And then we don't have any systems in place in which to re-educate people out of the reactionary things that we've been indoctrinated with. So how can we form a new system with the same mind that created it? That is what we talked about. And I gave him this analogy here that even if you pick up the gun and have some kind of resistance happening towards the elite, that it won't be a full or complete resistance because we all won't be free. And I gave him this story here, and it's very short. There's a jar, and a guy puts two flies in a jar and then puts the lid on the jar. And the flies trying to escape that jar hits their head on the top of the lid over and over and over again until finally they accept their condition that I can't go any higher. So they stay in the middle of the jar, never escaping, never going any higher because they already know there's no escape. The lid is removed from the jar, but the flies never escaped the jar because they had already accepted their condition. That's what I'm saying. Like, since a lot of us have accepted our conditions, even if we were to engage in, guerrilla warfare, which requires a certain rebelling of the conditions, if we don't examine every piece, every examination, free every marginalized group, again, it's not revolution. It's a group of people looking to seize power and have that same power that exists in their own hands while keeping the system intact. Yeah, I hope that answered one of your questions. But yeah, that's something we have to grapple more with. I think Beck can also answer it too, because she's very intelligent, actually. So Beck, if you wanted to say what you had to say, but then also maybe answer a question.
Yeah, I'm sorry. What was the question? Just so I can add it to my response. I was driving.
It's all good. So basically, what does Black Awakening look like in a capitalist America or a capitalist country anywhere? He's from South Africa, and yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it
So,
was. Oh, I
man, I
wanted
haven't
to.
seen you in a minute. Also, I was gonna say, why you decided to make your name Chairman? How many niggas on this app named Chairman? That's
Yo,
Oh
that's one
no,
thing,
I
right?
was. I, I was in my university. There is what we call the SRC, which is the Students Representative
It's
Council.
bruh,
So
it's
I was
always some
sitting.
academic. Uh, um,
I was a member of the Student Representative Council in my university. So I was the chairperson.
oh, okay, okay. But you said also, were you want to ask me something again before I spoke?
Yes. Oh, I was asking, how do you uh, say you want to have a black awakening in a capitalistic America? It does not necessarily in a black capitalistic America, by the way, but in the world at large, even in Africa, whereby we can say in a neo-colonialized Africa or everything else. But how do you awaken the blacks? Because everything is politically motivated and politics is power. That power is money. So capitalism is everywhere.
Okay, so to first answer your question, how do we get to like a black political awakening? That's such a deep question, and I don't even know if I have the answer to that. But to back what Penn's saying, I don't think we have it. We're gonna get there yet. Why? Because I think, for instance, like there was a gentleman who spoke a little earlier about teaching our children to aspire to be the CEO and not the worker. That is the first mindset that got to go. We have to build what would I say, community or solidarity, camaraderie with the working class, and what does that look like? It doesn't look like aspiring to be it doesn't look like the divisions that we create now. Like, I come from a working class town where we taught tech job not tech jobs, but we're taught like career tech jobs, like engineering, plumbing, stuff like that, skills in high school because that's all we could do. But also, like, I know so many people who go to a factory and who have grandparents who work in coal mines. And, you know, there's a larger question about, like, okay, is this like sustainable work, when it comes to our environment? But overall, like, I think that the mindset needs to change. All work is valuable work. All work is important. That looks like um prioritizing like housework, like people who are mothers or who are homemakers. That's important work. If you work at the McDonald's, you're still a valuable member of society. You don't know how many people, especially when I was a waitress and I was working in fast food, how many people would be like, well, you shouldn't expect more pay because they would be like, oh, well, this is a job for high schoolers, this is a job for children, this is a job. Okay, so what you're essentially saying is, if I am a high school, if I'm a student, if I am a child, then I am less valuable. I do not deserve a living income. My work is not as valuable as the next person, even though I was working with 40-year-old niggas, bro. Like, most of the people in there are not like you know what I'm saying? They use it kind of speaks to the point that pen and paper was talking about, how they use children are oppressed class, and the way we get around with expressing people in certain fields or industries is by saying only these certain type of people who work it. So therefore, it doesn't matter if we don't pay them enough. It's only the immigrants and working class moms who do Uber. So we don't have to give them labor rights like the people who get recovered by the NLRA, et cetera, et cetera. That is like the mindset first that needs to change. All workers are valuable and important, and we need to have solidarity with all of them. And second of all, there needs to be the killing of the capitalists in your mind. Like, a lot of these niggas out here are capitalists with no capital. I love saying that shit because listen, for real. And it's a hard awakening, but most of us are not gonna be CEOs. It's the truth. Me, I went to college. I'm a teacher. You know what I'm saying? And I'm still struggling to pay my bills. I have a degree. I did what they told me to do, and it's because, oh, educators, most of them are women. Most of the people who teach in your third grade child are gonna be women, and that's another reason. You notice a lot of these fields that are undervalued, underpaid, underprotected are fields of work that have what we deem as less valuable people in society. And that's why we need to take out the mindset that, oh, this job is you're better if you do this job or if you do this job. We all trying to eat, you know what I'm saying? That's the first thing I would do. I don't want to take the time, but that's the first step I want to do, you know?
Beck,
I would
can I follow
suggest.
you up right quick? I'm so sorry for
Yeah, yeah,
throwing,
yeah.
but no, you hit on something that, as far as how, again, how we view work and labor, and then who works it also too, their value is attached to like what job they occupy. But then too, I want to say that that's why it's also so important that one, why would you want to be, a CEO or someone in position? Like, I understand the reference that Mr. JP was making. Basically, he was saying like, that to want more, to not settle for where they regulate us. But again, too, we have to push ourselves to, past the boundary that we haven't gone collectively in our consciousness. And that is, again, that even if we were CEOs, we wouldn't be better people and we wouldn't be better off because there can only be one. You know what I mean? Or there can only be a few. And the way I even say, like, what to back you up and how you challenged us to look and view it, these things differently. Also view looking what not working looks like. I of the political mindset that I don't care if you have a job or not, you should have housing. You should have great food, not just any food that they give you. You should have amazing tasting food. You have access to all the food that anyone else has. And again, when we challenge these things, we are more able to grapple with and create a society where that is able to exist and happen. And right now, because we're so indoctrinated, we haven't killed that white capitalist in our mind. It is hard for us to even fathom, like, well, why does everyone deserve housing? I had an argument with someone on this app saying, like, well, if everyone gets housing, I won't be able to have a pool. Wait, what
We
is
used to
going?
have community pools, y'all. You know what I'm
But
saying?
even that to be the first thing in your mind, like, oh, someone is going to get shelter, someone's going to get what I have. That means I can't have a pool. Like, are you serious right now? Like, that's again, the capitalist in your mind is more than just, oh, I got to accumulate as much as possible. It's also grappling with and accepting a process of dehumanization. That there are people who do not deserve to have housing because they haven't worked hard enough for the machine, or people who don't deserve access to healthcare because they haven't worked hard for the machine. That's a problem because that process is dehumanization. Again, you cannot take someone else's humanity without forfeiting your own. So for us to sit here and agree to be capitalists, we are literally forfeiting our humanity for what? Crumbs?
Can I say one more thing? Um, this kind of reminds me, I don't know if y'all read like Engels or like Marx, or I know you do, pen and paper and choose. Um, it kind of reminds me of Engels' like idea of what did he call it? I forgot, but it kind of goes with the theory of alienation, where like the one thing that differentiates us from like humans and animals, the one that humans have consciousness, most animals do not. But two, the animal like works to live, but what we as humans have created a society where we also work to live, and that's usually what we weren't always doing, if that makes sense. Like, our value is tied to our labor, which is so weird because I don't know, humans are more than that, if that makes sense. I know that's the most basic way to put it, but you're more than being a worker. Like, you notice how every time we talk to people, the first question is like, okay, your name, where you from? Okay, what do you do for work? Like, that's just one part of me. It's not who I am. It's not what I should lead with.
No, I agree with you. And I mean, that's the whole process of slavery and how that ushered in capitalism made us all chattel animals, beings for labor, literally dehumanization. So no, thank you. Also yours truly. I know you've been waiting, Bren. Thank you for being patient. So what's up?
Yeah, thanks again, Pen and Paper and Choose Violence for hosting the space. I appreciate it. Just wanted to highlight a few points on the chapter. I know there was a part in the chapter that talked about the CEOs and the welfare state, and it's interesting because even now they're trying to make a push for like this universal basic income, right? And it's interesting because all the CEOs are advocating for it, meaning that if everyone goes on this like UBI, right, it puts a cap on your earnings, but doesn't put a cap on the CEO's earnings, right? So it's funny how you have like the capitalist class, right, that's advocating for a social program in the form of universal basic income, right? That's one point. Um, a second point in the chapter regarding the welfare state. Um, it's interesting because like all this is tied to whiteness, right? In a sense, and like for people, like I know some people that are white, they don't work because they claim to have a quote unquote disability, right? But in terms of blackness, if people were to say like, you know what, I suffer from post traumatic slave syndrome, right? Do I qualify for a disability because it inhibits my ability to work, et cetera, et cetera? I don't think it would work in that sense because of North America being tied to sort of whiteness in that sense. So that's like the second point. Um, and shoot, I had a third point, but I forget. But yeah, and also my third point was to understand all of this, capitalism, whatever. And you guys are talking about like material, like the material economic conditions, right? I look at it from like socialism, but scientific socialism, right? Where you have to study, like, because scientific socialism looks at like the study of the oppressed, right? The study of the working class, and how do you address and solve that problem, right? And you look at the history of things to understand like what happened in the past using the scientific method, right? To basically create a solution to determine the future, right? The probable outcome of things, right? To address capitalism, because it's a critique on capitalism, which right now everyone is sort of under. But it's also to look at the material economic conditions because, like Beck addressed, um, your everything is tied to your labor, right? And um, it sort of creates these like divisions among people because of your labor in that sense. And also too, like you look at children working in these factories, et cetera, et cetera. And what you talked about earlier, Penn, about like, you know, kids going to work, but they're not really like, they're forced to work because they don't have any choice, but they're also benefiting the capitalistic system, right? And that also hurts their future because they're not really developing any skills or critical thinking skills to understand their situation they're in, how they're sort of being oppressed, right? Because you're taking away their right to education, forcing them to work in that sense, right? So you're also taking away their innocence, right? So that's like my last point is like all this is tied to like the capitalistic structure, but also it's fucking up a lot of people's material and economic conditions where everything's tied to what your labor. But I just wanted to share that point. Thank you.
Yeah.
No, thank you. My bad. Choose. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to make the point, to your second point about, do Black people have equitable access to disability services? No, they don't. And I think that's why it's so important to remember that all of our struggles are tied, because when we talk about ableism, that is directly tied to capitalism, because the ability to be productive gives you value in the system. So what does it mean when you don't have ways of being productive in traditional ways, in capital generating ways? Even if we think about all of us, and I'll say this because there are people who are also just not able to work right now too. But at some point in our lives, if we are blessed to reach an old age, all of us are temporarily able-bodied, meaning that at some point we're all going to be disabled. At some point, it's going to impact every single one of us, but we never talk about it as a way of oppressing people, right? Because it's just so normalized that, oh, if you can't do this, then you don't eat. That's not a normal position to take. And so if there is a Black person that has PTSD, CPTSD because of racism, obvious, like, they deserve resources. They do deserve those things. And noticing the discrepancy, and even when Black people can't produce what they're able to, get from the government, that's an important point, to just name ableism in this conversation. I saw Ryan and Amaze. I don't know who was first, so y'all can like figure it out. I don't know which one. Did y'all?
Maze, you can go ahead and go, and then Ryan.
Yeah.
Okay. Um. Some good points were made along the way before I got to speak. What made me raise my hand was when pen and paper was going in about the Stockholm syndrome and trying to answer a question that the chairman had. How do we awaken Black people? No matter where we are, yes, we must identify where we are in the space, what the threat is, and our options. From what I can discern globally, in each instance, we have an issue or blind spot when it comes to actually identifying the threat and then properly assessing where we are in proximity to that threat. We do not see ourselves as capable. And that's because, for the most part, we've handed too much over to the groups or entities that do not have our best interest at heart. They need us to comply. We fail to assess that. We participate willingly in systems that harm us with the expectation of some type of benefit from our participation. It's literally the living definition of insanity. It's not, and even it's like, if you fail, if you set out to fail, if your goal is to fail and you succeed, what have you done? What have you done? If you live the American dream, actually think about that. I'm an American, I'm in America. If you live as the concept has been taught to you, if you live out the American dream in this very skin that you're born in, what have you done? It irks my nerves a lot to sit in spaces, and it's gotten worse as I've gotten older, to sit and listen to people say this country was built by immigrants. And we sit for it. Now, we might sit for it to be, feel comfortable, not offend people. And then we sit back and maybe 20 minutes later, bitch about how African Americans are seen or the erasure of our history here. It's like we don't, and I get it, and I try, and I breathe with it, and I learn, and I try to remind myself of the compassion that I want, and I want to extend it to others, because we've all been screwed over. And it's not that we failed, it's that they succeeded. We were born into a fight, and for the most part, we knew we had a fight. We just didn't understand what the fight embodied. We didn't understand that playing the rules and doing the right thing, that's a part of keeping you right where they want you to be. So I struggle with, what is waking up mean? It's going to be hard, because that means and I said it before and I'll say it again, we have to stop seeing ourselves through the white lens. Understand, white sugar is poison. I don't give a damn how good it tastes. It's still poison. That degree you got from the university. Who says that's a degree? Who gives that value? You can listen and you hear people regurgitate that little snippet of Malcolm's speech when he's putting out the questions. Who taught you to hate your nose? Who told you you weren't good enough? But you don't question. Who says that's a degree? Who says that's a valid life? And why are you trying to measure up to people? Here's the twist. Okay, we want to play that game. Let's play this game. Did you know that the black woman was was insured? People laugh at the Kardashian woman and a few other celebrities for taking out insurance on their asses. But you know what? Our ancestors, they took out property insurance on them so that when they fell dead in the fucking field, they were compensated for that shit. How are you worthless? How could we ever let our kids feel or be taught that they're worthless when they, not the white children, the black children, especially the female, was insured? Think about the headspace. Think about the value. Think about the head held up. How could you ever tell me I'm nothing when I am actually a commodity? How am I worthless? And then you want to hand me swill? We would demand better, not only from them, but from ourselves. And then that's another hard discussion. Because within playing this game, people have figured out, well, if I keep, yeah, that's my sister, but if I keep her over here, I just feed her and take care of her like she's a fucking potted plant, it'll be okay. And that gives me standing because I'm a man? What? Identify the privilege and hold on to it like a cudgel and beat your sisters over the head with that shit. And we're still supposed to gaze upon you through black eyes and bloody nose like y'all are kings and defend you with our lives, even though you see us as worthless. Just because it don't come out your mouth don't mean we don't feel it. I'm rambling on. I'm going to stop. Thank you for the mic. Just try to see yourselves for yourselves and not through the eyes of your oppressor, because they've seen this before and they destroyed the steps that we've taken in the past to get free. And unfortunately, we got to learn how to fight different because they know what's coming. We don't. And to try to tell some of these people and wake them up to it, they don't want to hear that. They want their Starbucks. I'll end with that.
Cool, appreciate you. So I just want to follow up because we did have someone from South Africa who's also dealing with a right-wing back campaign to basically act violent and practice xenophobia against their fellow Africans called Operation Dudula, which mirrors what we see over here with the campaign of telling Black people that it's immigrants is the reason why things are bad. The same reason why crack is a totally different.
Or
Can y'all hear me?
Yeah,
Hello?
Penn is speaking.
I'm
I'm
gonna
gonna
drop down real
remove
quick.
speakers and then bring you back, okay?
My bad. So, damn, lost my train. Oh, there's Chairman. I'm glad he came back because, yeah, I wanted to tie what you were saying with the question he asked. So, the thing is, I want to bring up about Operation Dudula. Again, we have an equivalent movement here. It's not all FBA because this thing existed before, but the hatred of the other, and especially the other oppressed, is meant as a divide and conquer tactic. But I think what Mays was referring to, and you correct me if I'm wrong or misinterpreted, is the way in which they're taking Black history books and putting in that the Africans were actually immigrants that were just, indentured
Yes,
servants
it's
type
like
thing.
yes,
Yeah.
because what was barely taught to begin with in our public school systems is African American history, and even linking slaves and how that progressed into an African American citizen. That connection it's always been not even so much hinted, just flatly said. And if you don't are incapable of discerning that in that moment, you'll miss it. You might catch it years later, but it will have to come through your social interactions as you move on. It won't be something that is blatantly pulled apart, dissected, and actually inspected while you're in school. So now we have an erosion in our educational system to the point where just critical thinking is viewed as a threat, let alone being able to correlate what is written to your day-to-day existence, because they don't want the questions. These kids are fast. They're quicker, and they're thinkers, and they're asking questions, and it's making people uncomfortable. Because see, the arguments saying the changes that are coming about aren't in the streets. It's coming from them at home, and it's making
Right.
them uncomfortable, and it's reflecting really, really harshly, and it's making them uncomfortable. So they'll erase it so they don't have to continue on and possibly look at their great grandchildren or and have them hold up the same systems and uh hold them up as deities years from
Right.
now, that continue withering away of our lineage and our connection. It is a wedge. Believe it's a wedge, because my cousin is my cousin. It doesn't matter what state they come from, they're my cousin. But they don't want immigrants coming from the continent to this country and actually linking arms with anyone. They want you to say, okay, you're the good one because you're different, and they don't understand. They come from something different. They just want to create that wedge, and it's not, and there is no wedge, and that's the truth.
Okay.
Because at the end
I
of the
think I
day,
understand what you're
yeah,
saying too, and I'm glad that you clarified, because again, we have to make sure that we'll hear certain points and we might agree with it, but don't be afraid to ask for clarity, y'all, because again, people take things. There's so much happening right now. We want to make sure we're not co-signing other agendas that are actually counter-revolutionary. So being anti-immigrant is counter-revolutionary. Being against anybody because they come from the continent is counter-revolutionary. And unfortunately, that through the Trojan horse of co-opting reparations, the right wing has used that issue to come in and usher
I didn't
in fascist
even.
talking points.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I didn't even
No,
factor that in when I said that, but it's the truth. It's like just another way to make sure we do not see ourselves in each other and link arms. That's all.
exactly. And connect
That's
our
all it is.
issues. So it ties back to what Chairman was asking, what does a Black awakening look like? And if I can give my opinion again, and we'll go to Ryan next and then yours truly, is that as we highlight the things that's wrong, we should also look at that as things that need to be fixed. And we're going to have to do it on a global effort and practice internationalism. So for example, Chairman, like, let's say, so one of the pressing issues that we're going to find everywhere is access to clean drinking water. New Orleans is having an issue currently as we speak. Jackson, Mississippi is still going through their ongoing water crisis. So is Flint, Michigan. So are other places that have a water crisis, but they're not just as highlighted. And that's going to be a global issue, especially as they continue to privatize water and access to clean drinking water. So how would us, understanding that we have parallels there, create an awakening around changing our conditions? Because that's what wakes people. Rhetoric doesn't wake people. Rhetoric might draw them in. Rhetoric might be entertaining, but until you can offer a solution, an alternative, and a workable program to change people's material conditions, they won't awaken. Why would they? You know what I mean? You won't be able to spark that revolutionary zeal until you show that you have a plan that you can put in action and also put it in action. So when we can put theory into practice, that will cause awakening, and that will cause, more people to see that there is an alternative outside that system. And that we just have to make sure that these survival programs is what I'm initially saying to create, is we understand not the end all be all, but a way, again, to spark that revolutionary mind, to get people activated, have something worth defending, but then also understand that we need to go on the offensive and destroy the system that attacks us. Because even those survival programs that create, whether it's food gardens or any food sovereignty programs, free health clinics, all those things that people would accept as quote unquote nonviolent, the state sees that as a threat and affront. Because again, if I'm privatizing healthcare, you creating a free healthcare clinic against the people that I'm trying to keep sick so that I can keep manipulating them so I can cull the herd whenever I need to, that's a direct threat to me and my plans. So then we would have to understand that as we create these survivor programs, we're not doing so just so we can survive in the system. No, we're building them so that we can be able to destroy them, but have an alternative system to fall back onto to maintain the struggle, to maintain the revolution. So to just summarize, how do you wake up a people, a colonized people? You have to change their material conditions. You have to put theory to practice. Words is not enough, especially when you're hungry. Um, Ryan, and then yours. Oh, wait. Choose, did you want to add anything to his question, Sherman's question?
I will after.
Oh, go ahead, Ryan. I don't know if Ryan's there, if he can hear me. If
Ryan,
Hey, sorry. Hello, can y'all hear me?
yeah, can you hear Pen?
I can't. I'm sorry.
Hey Ryan, happy Sunday.
Happy Sunday. I hope everybody's doing well. I sorry. I'm just my original point was a little different, so I'm just gonna switch gears for a very short while. I know people have things they want to say. But I just wanted to go back to what we were talking about in terms of, um children and labor. For me, I really that to me is a discussion that we need to have about um how we raise children in the community as well. Just because I think that most of us here can probably relate to um having grown up in a culture where your labor was something that was expected even at a very young age within your household and within your community. And uh, for me personally, I can say that I want us to get to a point where we're teaching kids that um, your labor is a benefit for the community and not a punishment. And I think if we switch that mindset up instead of, punishing kids with chores or, y'all know what I'm talking about. That could also help with an awakening because they'll be more inclined to think of their work, like I said, as communal and benefiting their community instead of just a punishment. And that will help them to understand um, how to build up a better world around them. So that was my original point. I'm sorry to take things off track. I'm done.
No, you didn't take anything off track. Feel free to cook about whichever. And that goes for everyone in the space. If there's something on your mind that may trigger something else, it's never off topic. It's an open discussion. My bad, Choose. Go ahead.
No, I was gonna say that's good because I also feel like providing material conditions or providing an improvement on people's material conditions on an organizing level, that's essential. But I think adding to your point, like broadening our understanding of like why people are indoctrinated into oppression. One of the things that how they're indoctrinated is through the oppression of other groups, seeing children on a hierarchical status. If you're able to dehumanize someone on the basis of their identity or their positionality or their class, it makes it easier for you to internalize and accept that someone is doing it to you for a reason. And so that's why I believe that, a lot of times we treat issues within our own community as tangential. Like, oh, first we need to beat the white people and then we'll come back to these things. It's actually the other way around. We need to resolve these contradictions within our own communities so that when we actually fight against white supremacy, we're not also in fighting each other. Because how many times do we see that, like, within our own community, we'll dehumanize, like it's okay to dehumanize someone because they're gay or because they are of trans identity. Well, then that in turn indoctrinates the person who is being oppressive to accept oppression, and it just makes them want to be on the giving end of the oppression. They just want to be the oppressor rather than wanting to people see people really liberated. So I think the oppression of children is a huge way in which our community normalizes oppression, and then we say, okay, well, at least, I think somebody tweeted the other day, like, people want to grow up not because they want like to grow up. They want to grow up because they want to get out of oppression. And so then we get into that class, then it's suddenly like, yo, I could just do that same thing. And I think that for a lot of issues, one thing that will bring a Black awakening is actually focusing on those issues that they tell us are less important than white supremacy, focusing on patriarchy as an issue, focusing on ableism as an issue. Fat phobia is also an issue. These things all like make a soup in which it makes it very hard to organize in those conditions. Because how many times have I organized with people who make it very hard to do the material programs that we have to do because they're like, oh, I'm not touch that person's gay. I'm not fucking with that person. I don't agree with their lifestyle. If we actually resolve these internal issues, we will be more effective to organize to meet people's needs. And so that's why it's never okay to like when someone's bringing up patriarchy or misogyny, trans misogyny in conversations about Blackness to say, oh, that's not as important as white supremacy, because actually that's the one thing hindering us, or one of the things hindering us from having a united front against it, especially when it comes to yeah, I guess that's all I wanted to add. Because no, we absolutely need to think about children, and it's not tangential. It's a direct affront to white supremacy when we respect children and when we respect our young, especially Black children.
No, that's a good point. And then also that they're not separate from tackling white supremacy. Like all of those things are under the umbrella, and we have to understand that too. And so I'm really glad you brought that up. And no, you know what? I'll let yours truly go, and then I'll come back.
Yeah, thanks again. Just to clarify, the title of the chapter was A Black Awakening, right?
Yes, the book is called Black Awakening in Capitalist America, and then the chapter we're on is Corporate Imperialism versus Black Liberation.
Okay. I just wanted to ask, like, what's your take on like Black capitalism, in this sense?
It's counter-revolutionary.
Yeah, because like like it's heavily promoted, right? But I don't think that works. Like if we're talking about like liberation, then how, like, you can't promote Black capitalism if you're trying to change the material conditions and get Black people liberated on a grand scale, right? It doesn't really make any sense to say like, yes, we need Black capitalists, right? Because it's heavily promoted in like the entertainment industry, but how does that even solve the problem of getting all Black people liberated if people are still working like check to check?
Right. And that's what he's analyzing in this book. And he's bringing up examples in which leaders who were deemed militant at the time were actually just peddling Black capitalism on behalf of the white corporations to, again, act as wet blankets to suppress rebellion. And so he's mapping out how all these questions we have, well, maybe we can do it this way under Black capitalism. He's like, no, actually, y'all have already tried that. And here's what happened when we did. And here's who actually engineered that idea and concept even in the first place. That was the thing. It wasn't even an organic thing of, oh, we need to be Black capitalists. That wasn't the consensus of the people. The people wanted liberation. It was those that were bought off by corporations to then adopt these slogans and these sayings and name these programs and have them function in this way. And he maps it all out: who funded which conference, why certain phrases were used, and how the corporations at first were uncomfortable with the use of Black power, but then understood that these basically the militant ones or the so-called leaders that they needed were bought off, and that they were using it in a way to mean Black capitalism, even though they would say Black power. And so then the corporations were comfortable saying Black power too, because again, they're on code now. They're like, oh, okay, y'all are still working towards our ends, maintaining white supremacy. Well, cool. I don't give a fuck what you call it, as long as the end result is still the same. So yeah, that's the whole thing about what he's analyzing is Black capitalism will not work. It is not y'all's. It doesn't redistribute any power, any resources, none of that. It literally just appoints Black overseers and colonized overseers, because this is among all colonized people in the world. Colonized overseers to just basically maintain their empire, where they sit back and reap all the benefits and the power. And it's incredibly violent. That's another thing. We have to view this in a form of violence. Because basically your job then as an overseer is to make sure there are people who starve. So then how do you maintain that without the people coming to kill you in your sleep? Create hierarchies so that people have certain privileges. So yeah, you might be starving, but at least I give you like access to have a job where you can earn enough to maybe get something off the dollar menu at McDonald's. So you'll be okay with seeing someone homeless on the side of the street while you're walking past them on your way to work and not think anything of it. Shit like that is what they condition us under, accepting our place, quote unquote, under this barbaric capitalist system. So, yours truly, you're right on point, and keep pushing the boundaries. This shit isn't
And
working. So then
you
what
know,
is?
And I would encourage you also to go into the jumbo and look in the thread, because I feel like when I'm reading this book, there's a lot of things that are intuitive that you can see. But the way this author puts stuff is a little bit different. And he points to a lot of specific points in history where like that transition is happening. So definitely go back and listen to all the spaces, because I feel like political education is kind of like ammunition, because people are going to always have those points to bring up about like, oh, we could just try to have a business, try to be better capitalists than the white people. It's like, no, we've debunked this a lot of times before. Let's just move on from this conversation. So yeah, definitely go check out the other reading spaces, because I think that you like what you
yeah, I was
hear.
just gonna say one point too. Like I know, like in Memphis, like because it's a heavily black town, right? Like there's a company in Memphis, I think it's called like IPP, and the workers there, they're trying to actually fight back against the company because they're like cutting jobs over there, and they're upset, so they started going on a worker strike to say that like they're getting underpaid, and the company's just kind of exploiting them, right? Even though people have been there for like 30 years and more. And it's fucked up because it's like that's like capitalism at play, but it's like freaking neo-colonialism because they're still exploiting black people in Memphis in 2023, and those workers are also starting to strike back as well. You know what I mean? So like even in with capitalism, like people can't even be forced to even form their own unions to even protect themselves because the capitalists already figured out that like they can just be easily replaced, right? And yeah,
Yeah, or bought off.
yeah,
And that's the thing. So that's the thing that happens too, right? Like as people's consciousness starts to shift, right? And then people start becoming more aware of their conditions and have more questions. You start exposing more and more contradictions. It's why, like Choose was saying, I agree how she put it perfectly, is that political education is ammunition, and spaces in which you can talk and work out these contradictions and maneuver through these and break them down so that you can understand them is very important. Because then you would say, like, okay, say that you're new to looking at what's going on where people are unionizing, and if you haven't studied the history of unions and how they function in this country, you might automatically just think like, oh, this should work in the job place, should be more democratic because there's a union. That's not necessarily true. At one point in time, we could have been said that, but unfortunately, a lot of unions and how they work, especially the places that I've been, is that you'll have a board that has a say. And let's just say something's happening politically. Oh, a good example, actually. I want to say it was the dock workers in Oakland. I might be incorrect, but I'll correct it in a tweet if not. But it was the dock workers in Oakland, and they were talking about how their union used them because they used like a wedge issue or a political issue at the time that was trending. And I want to say it was with Mumia, and so the people were like, "We're going to withhold our labor until you free Mumia." These people had the few people that were controlling the union had no incentive, no reason to do that. It wasn't their goal. What it was is that they were holding the company hostage to get more money for themselves, and none of those benefits would trickle down to the workers. So the workers end up losing out on pay. Risk, they held all the risk to get in their jobs. And those people who were just corporately bought, they're not people who are for the labor of the people or for liberating the people. They were just the buffer class that saw an opportunity to occupy a spot in which they can capitalize off certain issues that happen in order to create upward mobility for themselves. And unfortunately, use the labor of the people to do so, or the withholding of their labor to do so. Things can function in so many different ways depending on who's sitting at the table and who's involved. We have to constantly engage and critique, no matter if it's some revolutionary label or some labor. All things need to be critiqued constantly. Is what I'm
yeah. I
trying
was
to
just I was
say.
just gonna say that like that's why I said with capitalism and capitalists, they can just buy people off and have people be put in place as a buffer, but it may not even serve the intentions of what is actually trying to be, what things are trying to get things done, right? In terms of creating the union to change everyone's economic material conditions, right? Because capitalists already figured that out. Like, yo, like for example, like if they get charged or fined for like an industrial accident or whatever, and they have to pay a fine, they can pay that off easily. For them, it's just a slap on the wrist, right? Because they can afford to do that, so they can pay people off to still continue on with business as usual, right? With capitalism. So like that's how they co-opt things too, because you know it's fucked up, but like they can get away with it because they're still operating under capitalism.
Right. But then also too, that's where the power leads. And, you know, the thing is that so these capitalists, the elites, the people in charge, the ones who hold power, they're not geniuses. They're not like ultra intelligent. They're not like, you know what I'm saying? Because I don't want to deify them. What it is that you have a bunch of Europeans that practice war on each other for centuries upon centuries upon century. And as you practice something, you become very good at it. The same way of erecting systems of oppression, practice over centuries upon centuries upon centuries, where you study human behavior, human responses to certain things. What can I do and how can I press it? Oh, I have to first dress it up like this and then present it and they'll take it. So you're talking about a machine that's constantly going for updates and refining itself, not itself, being refined by people who are put in positions to learn and study different aspects and then used again, their talents then used for the benefit of maintaining that system. I say that to say that should also tell you that a people is very capable of destroying it and that you can use that same talent, that same initiative to destroy what's oppressing you. And we have to remember that because sometimes we hear these things and it becomes heavy. The ways of the world and the current events that we see become so heavy. And I'm not saying don't be uncomfortable. Absolutely, we should all be uncomfortable because in real time, we're seeing not just a genocide happening in Palestine, but all over the world. There's wars going on the continent of Africa who has been going on, used by the controlled by puppet leaders who are then controlled by the West. And they have had whole schools shot up and everything like that. And unfortunately, their stories don't get told on the same level because, again, hierarchy, racist, white supremacy, and the way blackness is viewed, even our liberation, our trauma is not viewed in the same way or held in the same care and consideration. I say that to say what Hughes is saying is that when she brought up about transphobia and fat phobia and all these things being allowed to exist inter-community wise, you have to have a plan of action to address all these to destroy them, but also too, what does restorative look like? Restorative justice look like for those communities that have been marginalized? Because it's not just enough to say I'm going to stop being on the side of fascism and stop being a bigot. You would also have to repair what was broken through all those times in which those things existed unchallenged or not challenged enough. And I would say how that looks like is there are many people who, again, their talents can be used for revolution. If they're being cut out because we as a community have allowed white society to determine and tell us who should be marginalized in our community. And it's not based on anything more or for the benefit of the community, quite the opposite. And they know it's for the opposite. It's actually to the detriment of our community. Because if we said, oh, yo, we don't want no gays, well, then you mean you don't want James Baldwin's work? Oh, so you don't want the work of, Angela Davis. Oh, so you don't want fat black women. So Fannie Lou Hamer, she don't matter. Like all those geniuses that we would throw away because of some stupid ass white supremacist society that tells us to, we're only doing ourselves a disservice. So those things can't exist at the same time true revolution arises. It won't happen. We are going to have to destroy those things that exist with us in our inter-community wise and the way we relate to each other, because we have to make it safe for people to be able to practice community. And that's the only way we can build sustainable survival programs and sustainable revolution and take part in a revolutionary process that liberates us and creates the society that we all should want and thrive to live in. And we can't do that if we still have these contradictions within our own communities. Revolution won't bloom in that condition.
I really I think and the audience wrote in the comments like slavery never ended, y'all, because I think this conversation about like the group dynamics really ties into that perfectly, because number one, slavery did never end, y'all. Like literally it didn't end. But also I feel like people are under the assumption that because they exist in a hierarchy and there's like I guess a hierarchical like component to our community, that means that we're not enslaved anymore. Like there was even hierarchies on the plantation. Not all enslaved people had access to the same amount of resources and power. So it's kind of like a trick. It's like a trick for them to be like, oh, well, you can have power over these other, the ghetto blacks or whatever, class a black person wants to see themselves as better than. It's like an illusion of freedom to say, well, I might not be totally free, but at least I can oppress somebody else. But no, you didn't exit the plantation because that dynamic also existed on the plantation. So it's just a further like blurring, a further um essentially mudding of the waters to say people to for people to believe that they're free. But I think Redacted on Twitter said it perfectly. Slavery has just been perfected at this point because it is invisible, and the war that we're fighting right now under occupation, right? Because we are under occupation of a settler colonial state. The United States is a settler colonial nation. We don't even see what is happening to us as a war right now. We'll say to end the occupation somewhere else, but right here, right now, we're also living in open air prisons, and niggas will dead ass like in the Bronx. There's white people who come and take buses to come look at the hood, like on some voyeuristic weird shit. So it's not even that different. Our
Wait,
Yeah,
so
community.
bro.
Chief Fox, you're saying they're
Christian
doing hood
missionaries would
tours?
go down to Memphis.
I'm so sorry to mute because everyone started talking at once. She shook it up. I was like, God damn.
My
Wait,
bad,
so Chief,
y'all. I was
No,
just
let's
saying
wake it
they do the
up.
same
Let's
thing
wake
down south. You'll see Christian missionaries down in Memphis, like
it.
they're trying to help the children, which is good
Mhm.
because I'd rather